What happened when the bully teacher found out that I am the principal's daughter? My mom became principal at my school the summer before my junior year. I asked her not to tell anyone because I didn't want special treatment. I didn't want kids thinking I got good grades because my mom ran the school. She agreed and kept it quiet. Nobody knew. I had my dad's last name anyway, so it wasn't obvious. Mrs. Holloway taught AP English and her daughter Brooke was in my class. Brooke was fine at English, but I was better. That's not me bragging. It was just true. I got higher scores on every essay. I participated more in discussions. I actually did the readings. And Mrs. Holloway absolutely hated me for it. It started small. She'd call on Brooke to answer questions even when my hand was up first. She'd praise Brooke's essays in front of the class, but never mention mine even when I scored higher. When we did group discussions, she'd cut me off mid-sentence to let Brooke talk. I told myself I was imagining it. Then it got worse. She started grading me harder than everyone else. I turned in an essay that I knew was good and got a C-. Brooke turned in an essay with actual spelling errors and got an A. When I asked Mrs. Holloway about my grade, she said my analysis was superficial and I needed to try harder. She said maybe this class was too advanced for me. She said not everyone is cut out for AP level work. I rewrote the essay exactly the way she wanted and she gave me a C. She said I still wasn't grasping the material. Brooke got moved to the front row. I got moved to the back corner. Holloway would make little comments when she passed my desk. Things like, I hope you're actually paying attention today, or let's see if you can keep up with the rest of the class. She'd say them quiet enough that only I could hear. When I tried to report it to my mom, I stopped myself. I wanted to handle this on my own. I didn't want to be the kid who ran to the principal every time something was unfair. So I just kept my head down and did my work. The snap happened during our midterm presentations. Everyone had to present an analysis of a novel in front of the class. I spent 2 weeks on mine. I practiced every night. I knew it was the best work I'd ever done. Brooke went before me. Her presentation was fine. Nothing special. She read off her notes the whole time and mispronounced the author's name twice. Mrs. Holloway stood up and clapped when she finished. She said it was one of the finest student presentations she'd seen in her 15 years of teaching. She said Brooke had a natural gift for literary analysis. She said she was so proud of her. Then it was my turn. I gave my presentation and I knew I nailed it. I didn't use notes. I made eye contact with the class. I hit every point perfectly. When I finished, Mrs. Holloway just stared at me. She said it was clear I had copied my analysis from the internet because there was no way I could have come up with those ideas on my own. She said she was giving me a 0 and reporting me for academic dishonesty. The whole class went silent. I felt my face get hot. I told her I didn't cheat. I told her I worked on this for 2 weeks. She said that was exactly what a cheater would say. She said I should be ashamed of myself for trying to take credit for someone else's work. She said she knew from day one that I didn't belong in her class. That's when I snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at her and said I wanted to discuss this with the principal right now. Mrs. Holloway laughed. She said fine. She said she'd be happy to tell the principal exactly what kind of student I was. She said the principal would probably recommend I be expelled for cheating. She told me to go ahead and make an appointment if I thought it would help. I said I didn't need an appointment. I pulled out my phone and called my mom. The whole class watched. Mrs. Holloway had this smug look on her face like she was about to win. Then my mom picked up and I said, "Hey Mom, can you come to Mrs. Holloway's classroom right now?" Mrs. Holloway's face changed. She said, "Mom?" I said, "Yes." "My mom is the principal." The color drained out of Mrs. Holloway's face completely. Mom walked through the doorway, and every head in the room turned toward her. She wore her principal blazer and carried a leather folder under one arm. Her face looked calm, but I could see the tight line of her jaw. Mrs. Holloway stood next to her desk with both hands gripping the edge. The grade book sat in front of her and her knuckles had gone white. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I watched my classmates' eyes go from me to Mom to Mrs. Holloway and back again. The silence felt heavy and thick. Mom's heels clicked against the floor as she walked to the front of the room. Mrs. Holloway opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her face had lost all its color and she looked like she might throw up. Mom stopped a few feet away and straightened her blazer. She looked at Mrs. Holloway without any expression on her face. The professional mask was perfect. Mom asked Mrs. Holloway to step into the hallway for a private conversation. Her voice came out steady and measured. Not angry, not upset, just completely professional. Mrs. Holloway's hands started shaking as she picked up her grade book. She fumbled with it and almost dropped it. A substitute teacher appeared in the doorway behind Mom and moved into the room. Mrs. Holloway walked toward the door like someone heading to their own execution. Her legs looked unsteady. She kept her eyes on the floor. Mom followed her out and closed the door behind them. The substitute teacher introduced herself, but I didn't catch her name. Through the small window in the door, I could see Mom and Mrs. Holloway standing in the hallway. Mrs. Holloway's mouth was moving fast. Her hands gestured wildly. Mom stood perfectly still with her arms crossed. Then Mrs. Holloway's voice got louder. I could hear it through the door even though I couldn't make out the words. She sounded desperate, like she was making excuses and explanations that kept getting more frantic. Mom didn't move. She just listened with that same calm expression. Voice rose higher and I heard the word misunderstanding and the phrase just trying to motivate. Mom's face didn't change at all. Nicholas Berg sat 2 desks over from me. He leaned across the aisle and whispered that he'd been wanting to say something for weeks. His voice was quiet enough that only I could hear. He said he saw how Mrs. Holloway treated me differently. He saw the grades that didn't make sense. He saw the comments and the way she cut me off during discussions, but he didn't know how to say anything. He didn't know if anyone would believe him. Two other students sitting near us nodded. A girl named Sarah turned around in her seat and whispered an apology. She said she should have spoken up. She said she felt bad every time Mrs. Holloway made those comments to me. Another student named Marcus said the same thing. Then another. Suddenly, half the class was quietly apologizing for staying silent. They all saw it. They all knew it was wrong. But nobody said anything until now. I felt this weird mix of feelings. Part of me felt good that people actually noticed, that I wasn't imagining things, that other people saw the same unfair treatment I experienced. But another part of me felt sad and a little angry. Why did it take this big dramatic moment for anyone to acknowledge what was happening? Why didn't anyone speak up when it might have actually helped? I didn't say any of that out loud. I just nodded and whispered thanks. The substitute teacher told everyone to work quietly on their reading assignments. She said the situation would be resolved soon and we should focus on our work. Everyone pulled out books, but nobody actually read. The room buzzed with quiet whispers. People kept looking at me and then looking away when I caught them staring. Brooke sat in the front row at her usual desk. She stared down at her hands in her lap. Her face had turned bright red. The color spread from her cheeks down her neck. She looked embarrassed and angry at the same time. Her shoulders hunched forward like she was trying to make herself smaller. I almost felt bad for her. This whole mess wasn't really her fault. She didn't ask her mom to favor her. She didn't ask for the inflated grades or the constant praise. But then I remembered how she was accepted all of it. How she smiled when Mrs. Holloway stood up and clapped for her presentation. How she never once said anything when her mom tore me down. She benefited from the unfair treatment and never questioned it. My sympathy disappeared pretty fast. 15 minutes passed before Mom came back. She walked through the door and moved straight to where I sat in the back corner. Her face still looked calm and professional. She asked me quietly to gather my things and come to her office. I shoved my notebook and textbook into my backpack. My hand shook a little as I zipped it up. Through the hallway window, I could see Mrs. Holloway walking fast toward the administrative wing. Mr. Henderson walked beside her. He was the assistant principal, and he looked serious. Mrs. Holloway's arms were wrapped around her gradebook like she was trying to protect it. She didn't look back at the classroom. The second I stood up to leave, the room exploded in whispers. Everyone started talking at once. The substitute teacher tried to quiet them down, but it didn't really work. I followed Mom out into the hallway and heard the noise level rise behind us. Everyone was trying to process what just happened. I wondered what they were saying about me, about Mrs. Holloway, about the whole situation. Mom's office sat at the end of the administrative wing. She unlocked the door and held it open for me. I walked in and she closed it behind us. The sound of the lock clicking felt final. Mom took a deep breath and set her leather folder on the desk. She sat down in her chair and gestured for me to sit across from her. Then she asked me to explain everything from the beginning. Her voice was still calm, but I could hear the edge underneath. I opened my backpack and pulled out the folder I'd been keeping. Inside were all my graded essays from the semester. Every single one. I'd kept them all even though seeing those unfair grades made me feel sick. I spread them out on Mom's desk. Then I pulled out my notebook where I'd written down every comment Mrs. Holloway made, every public humiliation. Every time she cut me off or moved me to the back or told me I wasn't good enough. I'd documented everything with dates and times. Mom picked up the first essay and looked at the grade. C-. She read through it quickly. Her professional mask slipped just a little. I saw her jaw tighten. Her eyes got harder. She picked up the next essay. Another C, then another. She read through my notes about the comments, about being told I didn't belong in the class, about being accused of cheating. Her hands gripped the papers tighter. The anger showed in her eyes even though her voice stayed steady. She asked questions about specific incidents. I answered each one. The whole story came out. Everything I'd been holding in for months. Mom set down the papers and told me she had to handle this through proper administrative channels. She said every maternal instinct wanted to protect me right away, wanted to fix this immediately, but she had to follow the rules, had to do this the right way. She picked up her phone and called Kathy Marshall. Kathy was the English department head. She supervised all the English teachers, including Mrs. Holloway. Mom asked her to come to the office right away. 5 minutes later, Kathy knocked on the door. She came in looking concerned and confused. Mom explained the situation briefly. Then she asked Kathy to review my essays alongside Brooke's work from the same assignments. She wanted an objective comparison of the work quality versus the grades assigned. Kathy sat down at the desk and started reading. She picked up one of my essays and read through it carefully. Then she found Brooke's essay on the same assignment in the gradebook records. Her face changed as she compared them. Her eyebrows pulled together. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. She looked troubled. She read another pair of essays, then another. The pattern became obvious. My work was consistently stronger but graded much lower. Brooke's work had clear mistakes but received A grades. Kathy set down the papers and looked at Mom. She said the discrepancy was significant and concerning. She said this needed immediate attention. Mr. Henderson knocked on the door and came in carrying a thick file. He was the assistant principal and he handled most of the student complaints. He said he pulled Mrs. Holloway's personnel file after the hallway conversation. He spread out several papers on the desk. 2 years ago, a student transferred out of Mrs. Holloway's class. The transfer request cited unfair treatment and bias. The complaint wasn't investigated thoroughly at the time. Last year, a parent complained about grade inflation for students Mrs. Holloway personally liked. That complaint also got brushed aside without real investigation. Mr. Henderson pointed to another document. 3 years ago, a different parent raised concerns about favoritism. The pattern was clear. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the second or third time. Mrs. Holloway had a history of this behavior. Nobody had taken it seriously enough to do anything about it. Mom's case for administrative action got stronger with each piece of evidence. She looked at me and then at the file. Her expression stayed professional, but I could see the anger building underneath. Mom asked me directly why I didn't come to her sooner. Her voice was gentle but firm. I told her the truth. I wanted to prove I could handle my own problems. I didn't want to use our relationship as a shield. I didn't want to be the kid who ran to the principal every time something was unfair. I wanted to deal with it myself. Mom nodded slowly. She understood. But then she said something that made me stop and think. She said suffering in silence isn't strength when someone in authority is abusing their power. She said there's a difference between being independent and allowing yourself to be victimized. She said speaking up when something is wrong isn't weakness. It's actually the stronger choice. We talked for a while about that difference. About when to handle things yourself and when to ask for help. About recognizing when a situation is beyond your ability to fix alone. I realized she was right. I should have spoken up weeks ago. I should have told her when the grading first got unfair. When the comments started. When Mrs. Holloway moved me to the back corner and started undermining everything I did. I thought I was being strong by handling it alone. But really, I was just letting the abuse continue. Kathy Marshall gathered up my essays and stood. She said she would take them to be regraded by 2 other AP English teachers. Teachers who didn't know anything about the situation or the context. Mom explained this would provide an objective assessment of my work quality. It would establish whether Mrs. Holloway's grades were professionally defensible or clearly biased. The process would take a few days, but it was necessary to build a proper case for disciplinary action. A case that would hold up to any challenge or appeal. Kathy promised to handle it quickly and keep everything confidential. She left with the essays in a folder. Mr. Henderson stayed to discuss the next steps. Mom talked about placing Mrs. Holloway on administrative leave pending investigation. About reviewing all her grade records for patterns of bias. About interviewing students who might have witnessed the unfair treatment. The administrative process was starting. Finally, someone was taking this seriously. Finally, something was being done about it. Mom told me the next morning that I'd be working in the library during English class while the investigation moved forward. She walked me there herself before first period and explained the situation to the librarian. The space felt quiet and empty compared to a regular classroom. I sat at one of the back tables with my textbooks spread out, trying to focus on homework for my other classes. Around mid-morning, a woman I didn't know walked over and pulled out the chair across from me. She introduced herself as Anastasia Waters, the school counselor. She said Mom had asked her to check in and see how I was handling everything. I told her I was fine. She gave me this look that said she didn't believe me but wasn't going to push. She explained that her office was always open if I needed someone to talk to about the stress or the humiliation of what happened. She left her card on the table and said sometimes it helps to process these things with a neutral person who isn't involved. I thanked her and meant it. But honestly, I mostly just felt relieved that adults were finally taking this seriously and actually doing something about it instead of telling me to work harder or try to get along better with Mrs. Holloway. 2 days passed slowly in the library. I finished all my homework for the week and started reading ahead in my textbooks. Other students would glance at me when they came in during their free periods, but nobody asked questions. On Thursday afternoon, Mom called me to her office. Kathy was already there with a folder of papers spread across the desk. She looked up when I came in, and her expression was serious but satisfied. She told me the regrading was complete. 2 other AP English teachers had reviewed all my essays without knowing anything about the situation or whose work they were evaluating. My scores came back dramatically different. Every single essay received an A grade from both reviewers. One teacher had written detailed comments praising my analysis and writing style. The other had noted that my work showed exceptional understanding of the material. Kathy set the papers in front of Mom and pointed to the grade comparisons. The evidence of Mrs. Holloway's bias was now undeniable and documented in black and white. Mom looked at the papers for a long time without speaking. Then she picked up her phone and asked her assistant to schedule a formal meeting with Mrs. Holloway for Friday afternoon. I went back to the library but couldn't concentrate on reading anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from Nicholas. He said word was spreading through school that something major had happened in Mrs. Holloway's class. Most students didn't know the specific details, but everyone was talking about it. He said several of our classmates had approached him asking if there was anything they could do to help. They wanted to provide statements about what they'd witnessed if it would help my case. I forwarded his message to Mom. Within an hour, she had Mr. Henderson send an email to students in my English class. The email explained that the school was conducting an investigation into teacher conduct, and any students who witnessed relevant incidents could submit voluntary written statements. The statements would be kept confidential and used only for administrative purposes. No student would face any negative consequences for participating or choosing not to participate. By Monday morning, 8 students had submitted detailed statements. Mr. Henderson brought them to Mom's office in a thick folder. I sat there while Mom read through each one out loud. The first statement came from a girl who sat near me in the back corner. She described Mrs. Holloway would make comments under her breath when walking past my desk. comments about paying attention and keeping up with the class. She said it made her uncomfortable because I was clearly one of the best students, and the comments seemed designed to embarrass me. The second statement came from Nicholas. He documented 3 specific instances where Mrs. Holloway cut me off mid-sentence during class discussions to let Brooke speak instead. He noted that it happened even when I was making valid points and Brooke's contributions were less developed. A third student described the grading discrepancies. She sat near both Brooke and me and had seen our graded essays multiple times. She said my work was consistently stronger but received lower grades. She mentioned feeling confused about the disconnect between quality and scores. Another statement talked about the atmosphere of bias in the classroom. The student said it was obvious to everyone that Mrs. Holloway favored Brooke and treated me unfairly. Several students had discussed it privately but didn't know how to report a teacher's conduct without proof. 2 more statements specifically mentioned the midterm presentation incident. Both students said my presentation was clearly superior to Brooke's, but Mrs. Holloway's reactions were completely opposite. They described feeling shocked when Mrs. Holloway accused me of cheating. One student wrote that the accusation seemed to come from nowhere and made no sense given the quality of my work all semester. The statements corroborated everything I had experienced. They added credibility to the formal complaint and showed this wasn't just my perception or sensitivity. Other people had witnessed the pattern and recognized it as wrong. Friday afternoon arrived and Mrs. Holloway showed up for her disciplinary meeting with a union representative. I wasn't in the room, but Mom told me later what happened. Mrs. Holloway came in on the defensive immediately. She claimed I was actually performing poorly in her class, and she'd been trying to motivate me to improve through tough feedback. She said I was only complaining now because I wanted special treatment as the principal's daughter. She tried to frame the whole situation as a student who couldn't handle high academic standards and was using her mother's position to get out of consequences for mediocre work. Mom let her talk without interrupting. Then she calmly opened the folder on her desk. She presented the regraded essays first. She showed Mrs. Holloway the original grades and then the objective assessments from 2 other AP English teachers. She pointed out that my work consistently received A grades when evaluated without bias. She asked Mrs. Holloway to explain the dramatic discrepancy between her grades and the objective reviews. Mrs. Holloway stammered something about different teaching philosophies and grading standards. Mom moved to the student statements next. She read sections from each one out loud. The preferential treatment of Brooke, the public put-downs directed at me, the obvious grading discrepancies, the general atmosphere of bias that other students had noticed and felt uncomfortable about. She showed Mrs. Holloway the documentation of her comments during the presentation incident. Multiple witnesses confirming that she accused me of plagiarism without evidence and said I didn't belong in her class. Mrs. Holloway's defense crumbled as the evidence mounted. Her face went pale and she stopped trying to argue. The union representative leaned over and spoke quietly to Mrs. Holloway. Mom said she could hear him advising that the evidence was overwhelming, and Mrs. Holloway should accept responsibility rather than make things worse by continuing to deny what clearly happened. Mrs. Holloway's composure broke completely. She started crying and admitted she felt threatened by my academic performance. She said having me in the class made Brooke look less accomplished by comparison. She said she knew it was wrong, but she couldn't help wanting to protect her daughter and make sure Brooke got recognition. She acknowledged that her behavior was unprofessional and inappropriate. Then she tried to minimize it by calling it poor judgment, rather than intentional harassment. She said she never meant to hurt me, and just wanted to help her daughter succeed. Mom's expression stayed neutral, but I could imagine the anger underneath. She explained that Mrs. Holloway would be placed on immediate administrative leave, while the district reviewed the case and determined final disciplinary action. Kathy would take over the AP English class for the rest of the semester. All of my grades would be reviewed and corrected based on the objective assessments. Mrs. Holloway's face showed she understood what this meant. Her teaching career at this school was effectively over. The next day, Brooke found me in the hallway between classes. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying. She stopped in front of me and said she needed to apologize. She said she was sorry for benefiting from her mother's favoritism. She admitted she knew something felt wrong about the constant praise and recognition. She said deep down she knew I was better at English, but she convinced herself she actually earned all the positive attention because it felt good to finally be the best at something. Her voice cracked when she talked about how her mother's actions had ruined everything. Now everyone would think she only got good grades because of favoritism. Nobody would believe she had any real talent or ability. I told her I didn't blame her for her mother's choices. She didn't ask for the special treatment and she couldn't control what her mother did. We had an awkward but honest conversation about how the situation hurt both of us in different ways. I lost confidence and felt attacked for doing good work. She lost credibility and would always wonder if her achievements were real or manufactured. Neither of us got what we actually needed from that class. Monday morning, Kathy stood at the front of the AP English classroom and introduced herself as the new teacher. She acknowledged that there had been a difficult situation that required administrative intervention. She didn't go into specifics about what happened or who was involved. She made clear that all students would be treated fairly and graded objectively going forward. She said her job was to help everyone learn and improve their skills without favoritism or bias. The class seemed relieved to have clarity and a fresh start, but the atmosphere was noticeably tense for the first few days. Students were careful about what they said and how they acted. Nobody wanted to be seen as taking sides or gossiping about the situation. Gradually, things started to feel more normal, as Kathy proved herself to be a fair and supportive teacher. My corrected grades were posted by the end of the week. The official transcript now showed consistent A performance throughout the semester. Every essay that Mrs. Holloway had graded unfairly was revised to reflect the objective reviews. Seeing the official recognition of what I actually earned felt validating after weeks of being told I wasn't good enough. Several teachers in other departments quietly mentioned they were glad the situation was addressed. They said they'd noticed my distress over the past months but didn't know the cause. Now they understood why I'd seemed stressed and anxious. Their support meant more than I expected. The school board meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after Mrs. Holloway's administrative leave started. Mom told me the board would review all the evidence and make their final decision about her employment. Brittany Holloway had to leave the room when they discussed her daughter's case because of the family connection. The other board members spent 2 hours going through everything. They looked at the regraded essays. They read the student statements. They reviewed the documentation of Mrs. Holloway's comments and grading patterns. Mom presented her recommendation for termination based on unprofessional conduct and abuse of authority. The vote was unanimous. Mrs. Holloway's teaching contract would not be renewed at the end of the semester. She was banned from returning to campus for any reason. Mom called me that evening to tell me the decision. Her voice sounded tired but satisfied. She said the board took the situation seriously and agreed that Mrs. Holloway's behavior violated professional standards. I felt relief wash over me knowing it was officially over. Dawn Holloway caught me in the hallway after school the next day. She teaches chemistry in the science wing, and I'd seen her around but never really talked to her. She looked uncomfortable as she approached me. Her face was red and she kept fidgeting with her car keys. She said she needed to apologize for her sister's behavior. She explained that family loyalty made her want to defend Mrs. Holloway at first. She said she told herself there must be some misunderstanding, or that the situation was being blown out of proportion. But then she saw the evidence. She read the student statements and looked at the graded work comparisons. She said there was no way to ignore what her sister had done. Her voice cracked a little when she talked about how embarrassed and upset she felt. I told her I appreciated her reaching out. I said I didn't hold her responsible for her sister's choices. She thanked me for understanding and said she hoped I could move forward without letting this experience damage my love of learning. We talked for a few more minutes and then she headed to her classroom. I felt good about the conversation. It took courage for her to approach me knowing what her sister had done. Mom and I had dinner together that evening at our favorite Italian restaurant downtown. We sat in a quiet corner booth and ordered pasta. She asked how I was really doing with everything that happened. I told her honestly that I felt relieved but also kind of drained from the whole experience. She admitted she struggled with wanting to intervene immediately as my mother, while knowing she had to follow proper procedures as principal. She said every maternal instinct told her to protect me right away, but she knew that would undermine the entire system. She had to trust the process, even though it meant I suffered longer than she wanted. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I told her I was grateful she handled it professionally. I said it proved the system works when people follow the rules, and that matters more than quick revenge. She smiled and said she was proud of how I handled myself through the whole situation. We spent the rest of dinner talking about lighter topics and laughing about random things. It felt good to just be mother and daughter without the weight of the school situation hanging over us. Anastasia Waters started checking in with me every week after the board meeting. She's the school counselor, and Mom asked her to monitor how I was adjusting emotionally and academically. We met in her office during my free period on Mondays. She helped me process the anger and hurt from being systematically undermined by someone in authority. We talked about how it felt to have my work constantly criticized and my abilities questioned. She explained that Mrs. Holloway's bias had nothing to do with my actual worth or capabilities. She said abusive authority figures often target people who threaten them in some way. My academic success made Mrs. Holloway feel like her daughter looked worse by comparison. That was her problem, not mine. We worked on rebuilding my confidence after weeks of being told I wasn't good enough. Anastasia gave me exercises to separate Mrs. Holloway's biased opinions from objective reality. She had me list evidence of my actual abilities based on other teachers' feedback and test scores. Seeing everything written down helped me realize how much Mrs. Holloway's treatment had been poisoning my self-perception. The counseling sessions made a real difference in how I felt about myself and my academic future. Kathy Marshall proved to be an excellent teacher who provided constructive feedback and fair grades based solely on work quality. She returned our latest essays on a Wednesday morning and spent time explaining her grading criteria to the whole class. She walked through what made a strong analysis versus a weak one. She pointed out specific examples from different papers without naming students. When she handed me my essay back, it had detailed comments in the margins. She'd noted where my argument was particularly strong and where I could improve my evidence selection. The grade at the top was an A-. She praised my essay analysis in class that day as an example of effective thesis development. I felt genuinely proud rather than suspicious of the recognition. The difference between authentic appreciation and biased favoritism became crystal clear. Kathy's feedback made me want to work harder and improve my skills. Mrs. Holloway's comments had made me want to give up and question everything I wrote. I realized how much Mrs. Holloway's treatment had been poisoning my self-perception and making me doubt abilities I actually had. Nicholas and I became closer friends through the aftermath of the situation. He started sitting with me at lunch, and we'd talk about what happened. He felt guilty about not speaking up sooner when he witnessed the unfair treatment. I told him I understood why he stayed quiet. Challenging a teacher's authority is scary and risky. He said watching me advocate for myself taught him something important about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. We started studying together for the upcoming AP exams. He helped me prepare for the next major presentation assignment since that's what triggered the whole confrontation with Mrs. Holloway. We practiced in the library after school and he gave me feedback on my delivery and content. Having a friend who witnessed everything and validates my experience helped reduce the lingering self-doubt. He reminded me that everyone in class saw Mrs. Holloway's bias and knew I didn't deserve that treatment. His support made me feel less alone in what I'd gone through. Transferred to a different AP English section taught by another teacher at the start of the next grading period. I saw her talking to the guidance counselor about the schedule change one afternoon. She looked relieved when she left the office with her new class assignment. She found me in the hallway a few days later and explained her decision. She said she needed a fresh start without the shadow of her mother's actions hanging over every class. Everyone in our old section knew what happened, and she felt like they were constantly judging her. She wanted to establish her own academic identity separate from the favoritism she received. I told her I understood her decision and respected what she was trying to do. She thanked me for not being hostile about everything. We're not friends, and probably never will be. But we nod to each other in the hallways without hostility. We both got hurt by her mother's choices in different ways. She lost credibility, and I lost confidence. Neither of us asked for that situation, but we both have to deal with the aftermath. The substitute teacher who supervised the class during the initial confrontation stopped me in the parking lot one afternoon. She said she'd been thinking about that day and wanted to tell me something. She said she was impressed by how I handled the situation with maturity and proper channels. She mentioned that many students would have either suffered in silence or lashed out inappropriately. Some kids would have screamed at Mrs. Holloway or caused a huge scene. Others would have just accepted the unfair treatment and never reported it. She said my approach demonstrated real character and strength. I called for help through the right channels and let the system work the way it's supposed to. Her words made me feel proud of how I managed the crisis, rather than ashamed that it happened. I thanked her for supervising the class that day, and for being willing to document what she witnessed. She smiled and said she was glad she could help. She told me to keep being brave and standing up for myself as I moved forward in life. Mom implemented new policies at the school based on lessons learned from my situation. She announced the changes at a faculty meeting and sent an email to all parents explaining the new procedures. Department heads now have to randomly audit teacher grades and compare them against student work quality. They pull samples from different classes and have other teachers review the work blind without knowing who graded it originally. The audits help catch bias patterns earlier before they cause serious damage. Mom also established an anonymous reporting system for students to flag concerns about unfair treatment without fear of retaliation. Students can submit reports online through a secure portal that doesn't track their identity. The guidance office reviews all reports and investigates when patterns emerge. The changes came directly from lessons learned through my situation. Mom wanted to make sure other students wouldn't have to suffer the way I did before someone noticed and took action. I felt glad that something positive emerged from the negative experience. My situation might prevent similar problems for other students in the future. My grades in other classes remained strong throughout the semester despite everything that happened with Mrs. Holloway. My history teacher gave me an A on my research paper about the civil rights movement. My math teacher praised my problem-solving approach during calculus lessons. My biology teacher selected my lab report as an example of excellent scientific writing. The consistent positive feedback from other teachers proved that my academic abilities were never the problem, despite Mrs. Holloway's claims. My history and math teachers both offered to write recommendation letters for college applications. They specifically mentioned my resilience and integrity during a difficult situation in their letters. They said I demonstrated maturity by handling a serious problem through proper channels, rather than giving up or retaliating inappropriately. The support from other faculty helped counterbalance the damage Mrs. Holloway tried to inflict on my academic reputation. I had concrete evidence that multiple teachers recognized my abilities and valued my work. Mrs. Holloway's biased opinions were the outlier, not the reality of my academic performance. 3 weeks passed since Mrs. Holloway walked out of the building for the last time. Kathy stood at the front of the classroom on Monday morning and asked if anyone wanted to redo their midterm presentations for proper evaluation. My hand went up before I could think about it. She smiled and told me to come prepared on Wednesday. I spent Tuesday night going over my analysis again. The same presentation Mrs. Holloway had called plagiarized, the same work she'd given me a 0 for. I practiced in front of my mirror until the words felt natural again. Wednesday arrived and I walked to the front of the class with my notes in hand. I didn't need them, but they made me feel more prepared. The classroom went quiet as I started talking. I made eye contact with different students as I explained my analysis of the symbolism and themes. My voice stayed steady as I connected the author's techniques to the broader message of the novel. I referenced specific passages and explained how they supported my interpretation. Nobody interrupted me. Nobody accused me of cheating. I finished my presentation and looked at Kathy. She was nodding and writing notes on her evaluation sheet. She looked up at the class and told everyone that my analysis demonstrated exactly the kind of critical thinking AP English is meant to develop. She said I showed deep understanding of literary devices and how to apply them to textual analysis. She marked an A on her grade sheet and held it up so I could see it. The vindication hit me all at once. This was the grade I'd earned 3 weeks ago. This was the recognition my work deserved. I walked back to my seat and several students gave me small smiles or thumbs-up gestures. Nicholas leaned over and whispered that my presentation was really good. I thanked him and sat down feeling lighter than I had in months. After class ended, 3 students approached me in the hallway. 2 girls from my discussion group and a boy who sat near the back. One of the girls apologized for not saying anything when Mrs. Holloway made those accusations. She explained that she wanted to speak up, but was scared of becoming a target herself. The other girl nodded and said she felt the same way. The boy admitted he knew the grading was unfair, but didn't know how to challenge a teacher's authority without proof. I told them I understood their fear, even though facing the attacks alone had been really hard. I explained that teachers hold power over grades and recommendations, so speaking up feels risky. But I also said I hoped they would stand up for other students in the future if they saw something wrong happening. I mentioned that bystander silence makes it easier for people in power to abuse that power. They all promised they would try to be braver next time. We talked for a few more minutes about the class and how different it felt with Kathy teaching. They seemed relieved to have apologized, and I felt a little better knowing they'd recognized what happened. Mom called me into her office after school that Thursday. She closed the door and told me the district was using my case as a training example. The professional development team created a presentation about recognizing bias and maintaining appropriate teacher conduct. She showed me the slides on her computer. They didn't use my name or any identifying information. The presentation described a situation where a teacher showed favoritism toward their own child and targeted another high-performing student. It outlined the warning signs other staff should watch for and the proper reporting procedures. Mom explained that administrators from 3 other schools in the district would see this presentation at their next training session. The situation served as a clear example of how personal relationships can corrupt professional judgment. I felt proud that my experience might prevent similar situations for other students. Mom said the district wanted to make sure teachers understood the serious consequences of bias and favoritism. She thanked me again for coming forward even though it was difficult. I told her I was glad something positive came from what happened. I started working on my college application essays in November. One of the prompts asked about overcoming a significant challenge. I wrote about the experience with Mrs. Holloway. The essay focused on learning when to ask for help and recognizing that self-advocacy isn't weakness. I explained how I initially tried to handle everything alone because I didn't want special treatment. I described the moment I realized that suffering in silence wasn't strength when someone in authority was abusing their power. I wrote about calling my mom and using proper channels to address the injustice. The essay ended with reflections on the importance of speaking up and trusting the systems designed to protect students. My English teacher reviewed the draft and said it was powerful and honest. Mom read it and got emotional. She said it showed real maturity and self-awareness. I submitted the essay to 5 different colleges. 3 months later, several admissions counselors mentioned during acceptance calls that the essay stood out. One counselor said it demonstrated unusual maturity for a high school student. Another said the honest reflection on a difficult situation showed character and growth. Transforming the negative experience into meaningful personal growth felt like taking back power. Mrs. R. Holloway tried to steal from me. Kathy assigned a major research paper in December worth 30% of our semester grade. The assignment required 15 pages analyzing a contemporary novel through multiple critical lenses. I threw myself into the work with renewed confidence. I chose a novel about immigration and identity. I spent 2 weeks reading criticism and taking notes on different theoretical approaches. My outline covered feminist theory, post-colonial analysis, and psychological perspectives. I wrote the first draft over winter break and revised it 3 times before submission. Without the constant undermining and biased grading, I remembered why I actually loved English literature and analysis. The research and writing process felt exciting instead of stressful. I turned in the paper on the deadline and waited for feedback. Kathy returned papers 2 weeks later with detailed comments written in the margins. My paper earned a 98, the highest grade in the class. Her feedback praised the depth of my research and the sophistication of my argument. She wrote specific comments about passages she found particularly insightful. The detailed response showed she took time to appreciate the nuances of my writing style and analytical approach. The college prep workshop started in January for all juniors planning to apply to 4-year universities. Brooke and I ended up in the same session by random assignment. The counselor divided us into groups of 4 to work on a mock application project. Brooke was in my group along with 2 students from other classes. We had to create a sample application package, including essays, activity lists, and recommendation requests. The project required collaboration and honest feedback on each other's materials. Brooke and I worked together without awkwardness. She offered helpful suggestions on my activity descriptions, and I gave her feedback on her essay about overcoming perfectionism. She was genuinely talented when she wasn't being compared to others or inflated by favoritism. I could see her growing into her own academic identity, separate from her mother's influence. We completed the project and presented our mock application to the counselor. Afterward, Brooke thanked me for the feedback and said my suggestions really helped. I told her the essay was strong and she should feel confident about her applications. We probably weren't going to be close friends, but we'd reached a place of mutual respect and understanding about what happened. Mom mentioned during dinner one evening that Mrs. Holloway accepted a teaching position in a different district. She was starting fresh at a school where her reputation wasn't damaged. The new position came with requirements for additional professional development and regular evaluations. Mom explained that the district wanted to give her a chance to learn from her mistakes if she took genuine responsibility. Part of me wished she'd been blacklisted from teaching entirely. I didn't think she deserved another opportunity to potentially harm students. But Mom said people deserve chances to learn and grow if they acknowledge their errors and work to change. She believed in redemption and second opportunities when someone showed real commitment to improvement. I wasn't sure I was that forgiving yet. The hurt and humiliation were still too fresh. But I appreciated Mom's perspective on growth and change even if I didn't fully agree with it. The AP exam was scheduled for early May. As the date approached, I felt genuinely prepared rather than anxious about sabotage or unfair grading. Kathy's teaching had reinforced my skills and knowledge over the past months. She filled in gaps that Mrs. Holloway's bias created by withholding proper instruction and feedback. We spent weeks reviewing literary terms, practicing essay structures, and analyzing sample passages. Kathy held review sessions after school for students who wanted extra practice. I attended every session and worked through practice exams. The preparation felt thorough and supportive. I walked into the exam confident in my abilities and grateful for teachers who actually helped me learn. The test lasted 3 hours with multiple choice questions and essay responses. I finished each section feeling good about my answers and analysis. The external evaluation would provide objective proof of my skills regardless of any teacher's personal bias. Nicholas and I celebrated finishing the AP exam by getting ice cream at the shop near school. We sat outside in the warm May sunshine and talked about how relieved we felt. He mentioned that watching me handle the Mrs. Holloway situation inspired him to stand up to his own father. His dad had been pressuring him to apply only to engineering programs at specific universities. Nicholas wanted to study environmental science at a school with strong field research opportunities. He said seeing me advocate for myself showed him that respecting authority doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. He told his father he was applying to the schools he wanted regardless of his dad's preferences. They had several difficult conversations, but Nicholas held firm on his choice. He said sometimes challenging unfairness is the right thing to do even when it's scary. I felt proud that my experience helped him find his own courage. We finished our ice cream and walked back toward school talking about our college plans and summer jobs. The AP exam scores arrived in July through the College Board website. I logged in early on the release day and clicked through to my results. A 5 appeared on the screen, the highest possible score. I stared at the number for a full minute, letting it sink in. The objective external evaluation confirmed what I always knew about my abilities. Mrs. Holloway's grades reflected her bias rather than my actual performance. I had concrete proof now that couldn't be disputed or questioned. I took a screenshot of the score report and sent it to Mom. She called immediately and congratulated me. She said she never doubted my abilities but knew the external validation would feel important. I printed the score report and bought a simple black frame at the store. I hung it on my bedroom wall next to my desk. Every time I looked at it, I remembered to trust my own assessment of my abilities, regardless of others' opinions. The score became a reminder that truth and merit eventually reveal themselves, even when someone tries to hide or deny them. Mom picked me up from the school that same afternoon. The score report arrived and drove us to this Italian restaurant she'd been wanting to try. We sat at a table by the window with the summer sun streaming in and ordered pasta and garlic bread. She raised her water glass and said she was proud of me for more than just the test score. She said watching me navigate that whole semester taught her things about being both a mom and a principal. She admitted she struggled with wanting to fix everything immediately when she saw me hurting, but following proper procedures showed her that systems work when you use them correctly. She said creating the anonymous reporting system and the grade audit policies came directly from realizing problems need to be caught earlier. We clinked our glasses together and she said we both survived something really hard and came out better for it. The first day of senior year arrived and I walked into my AP literature class with a different teacher who knew nothing about last year's drama. My schedule had 3 more AP classes, and I felt ready for all of them. When the literature teacher asked for volunteers to analyze a passage, I raised my hand without that sick feeling in my stomach, wondering if I'd get shut down. I gave my answer and she nodded and said that was an excellent observation. During the discussion, I participated 3 more times and nobody cut me off or made me feel stupid. After class, I realized I hadn't second-guessed myself once during those 50 minutes. Last fall felt like it happened to a different person. 2 weeks into the semester, Kathy stopped me in the hallway and asked if I'd be interested in peer tutoring for younger students who struggled with English. She said my essays showed I understood concepts clearly and could explain things in ways that made sense. I started meeting with 3 sophomore students twice a week in the library. One girl couldn't figure out how to structure a thesis statement, and I showed her the method that worked for me. Another student kept mixing up different literary devices, and I made flashcards that helped him remember. Watching them improve and seeing their confidence grow made me realize how much I'd learned. Working with them also made me think maybe I wanted to teach someday. Not like Mrs. Holloway, obviously, but helping people understand things they found confusing felt really satisfying. I was walking to my car after tutoring one afternoon when I saw Dawn loading boxes into her trunk in the teacher parking lot. She waved me over and asked how senior year was going. I said it was going well and asked about her. She said her sister got a position at a school in the next county and seemed to be doing better. Dawn mentioned that Mrs. Holloway started seeing a therapist to work through whatever made her act so unprofessionally. She thanked me for handling everything through the right channels instead of trying to destroy her sister completely. She said the consequences were serious, but not permanently devastating, and her sister had a chance to learn and improve. I told her I was glad to hear Mrs. Holloway was working on herself. I meant it too, even though I had zero interest in ever talking to her directly. Mom and I were eating dinner at home a few weeks later when she brought up the anonymous reporting system. She said student complaints about unfair treatment went up significantly since the system launched. But she saw that as positive because problems were getting addressed before they became major situations. She told me about 2 cases where teachers were showing favoritism, and the department heads caught it through grade audits. Both situations got resolved through coaching and mediation without needing formal discipline. She said the whole school culture shifted toward accountability. Teachers knew someone was paying attention, and students knew they had a way to speak up safely. I felt proud that my awful experience led to changes that helped other people. College application season hit full force in October, and I submitted my applications with a transcript full of strong grades and test scores that actually reflected my abilities. My recommendation letters came from teachers who knew my work quality and character. The essay I wrote about learning to advocate for myself tied everything together in a way that felt honest and real. I wasn't hiding what happened or pretending it didn't affect me, but I also wasn't letting it define me as a victim. I presented myself as someone who faced unfair treatment and handled it the right way. Someone who learned when to ask for help and how to use proper channels to address problems. I felt confident that colleges would see my true abilities instead of a story shaped by one person's bias. Nicholas texted me in November saying he got accepted to his dream school for environmental science. He said he never would have applied there if watching me stand up to Mrs. Holloway hadn't given him courage to stand up to his dad. His father wanted him doing engineering at specific universities, but Nicholas held firm on his own choice. We met for coffee to celebrate, and he said our friendship during that difficult semester taught him that supporting each other through hard things makes you stronger. We promised to stay in touch during college and keep encouraging each other. I was at a school event in December when Brooke walked up to me looking nervous but excited. She said she got accepted to a competitive creative writing program at a university I'd never heard of. She told me that separating from her mother's shadow helped her figure out what she actually loved. She realized she wanted to write stories rather than analyze other people's literature. I told her I was genuinely happy for her, and I meant it. We both found our real paths after everything forced us to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our situations. Kathy called me into her office in January and said she wrote me a recommendation letter for a scholarship I'd applied to months earlier. She showed me the letter, and I read through paragraphs about my academic abilities and my integrity during adversity. She specifically mentioned how I handled the difficult situation with maturity and proper procedures instead of trying to get revenge. She said my work quality spoke for itself, but my character during crisis showed who I really was. Her support meant everything because it came from someone who evaluated me objectively and saw my actual capabilities. The scholarship committee announced winners in March, and my name was on the list. The award ceremony happened on a Saturday afternoon in the school auditorium with parents and students filling the seats. When my turn came, I walked to the podium and they read portions of my essay about self-advocacy and standing up to unfair authority. After the ceremony, several parents approached me saying the story hit home because their kids faced similar struggles, or they remembered their own experiences with biased teachers. One mom thanked me for speaking up because it helped her daughter find courage to report a problem in her own class. Sharing my experience publicly felt powerful instead of shameful. What Mrs. Holloway meant as humiliation became a platform for positive change. Mom sat in the third row of the auditorium during the scholarship ceremony, her professional principal composure barely hiding the emotion in her eyes. When they called my name and read excerpts from my essay about self-advocacy and standing up to unfair authority, I watched her press her fingers to her lips. I walked to the podium and accepted the award certificate, then gave my prepared speech about learning when to ask for help and recognizing that using proper channels isn't weakness. My voice stayed steady as I talked about transforming a painful situation into fuel for positive change and protecting future students from similar treatment. When I finished and walked off stage, Mom met me in the side hallway and pulled me into a tight hug. She told me that watching me turn what Mrs. Holloway meant as humiliation into a platform for advocacy made her prouder than any grade or test score ever could. We stood there for a moment while other families moved past us toward the reception area, and she said our relationship grew stronger through facing this challenge together. She admitted she learned as much from me about courage and integrity as I learned from her about proper procedures and professional boundaries. The experience taught both of us lessons about communication, trust, and the difference between protecting someone and empowering them to protect themselves. Later at the reception, several parents approached to tell me my story resonated with their own experiences or gave their children courage to speak up about problems they were facing. One mother thanked me specifically because her daughter reported a bias issue in her math class after hearing my speech, and the early intervention prevented months of unfair treatment. Knowing my difficult experience helped others made the whole ordeal feel worthwhile and meaningful rather than just painful. The final weeks of senior year passed in a blur of college preparation and last-minute assignments. I submitted my enrollment deposit to my first-choice university, a school with strong academic programs, and far enough from home to feel independent but close enough to visit. My transcript showed consistent high performance across all subjects, with my AP English grades properly reflecting my actual abilities after Kathy's fair evaluation. The letters of recommendation from teachers who knew my work quality painted an accurate picture of my academic strengths and character. My college essay about learning self-advocacy tied everything together in a way that felt honest and complete. I wasn't hiding what happened with Mrs. Holloway or pretending it didn't affect me deeply. But I also wasn't presenting myself as a victim defined by someone else's bias and unprofessional conduct. The essay showed college as a student who faced unfair treatment, handled it through appropriate channels, and emerged stronger with clear understanding of my abilities. I felt confident heading to university with proper preparation, genuine confidence, and no lingering doubts about whether I actually deserved my academic success. Mrs. Holloway's attempt to undermine my academic identity failed completely, and I was moving forward with my integrity intact and my abilities properly recognized by people who evaluated me objectively. Graduation day arrived on a sunny Saturday morning in early June. I put on my cap and gown in the designated classroom where seniors gathered before the ceremony, surrounded by classmates I'd known for years. Nicholas found me in the crowd and gave me a huge grin, both of us excited and a little nervous about the transition ahead. We lined up alphabetically and processed into the packed auditorium while the band played the traditional march. Mom stood at the podium in her principal's robes, looking professional and composed as she welcomed families and prepared to present diplomas. When my row stood to walk across the stage, my heart started beating faster with anticipation. They called my name with honors recognition, and I walked across the stage trying not to trip over my gown. Mom handed me my diploma, and our eyes met with complete understanding of everything we navigated together this year. The moment felt triumphant, not just because I was graduating, but because I was doing so with my abilities properly recognized, and my character strengthened by adversity. She squeezed my hand briefly before I moved on to make room for the next graduate. I returned to my seat, clutching the diploma that represented 4 years of hard work and one particularly difficult semester that could have derailed everything, but didn't. My parents threw a graduation party at our house that afternoon, filling the backyard with family, friends, and several teachers who came to celebrate. Kathy arrived carrying a wrapped gift and immediately congratulated me on my college acceptance. She pulled me aside to the quieter corner of the deck and told me she felt confident I would excel at university. She said my experience this year actually prepared me well for handling challenges and advocating for myself in new environments. College would bring difficult professors, unfair situations, and moments when I needed to speak up for myself, and I now had proven skills for addressing those problems effectively. Her faith in my future success felt earned and genuine rather than empty praise. She knew my actual work quality and character, and her confidence came from objective observation rather than bias or personal connection. I thanked her for taking over the class and providing fair evaluation when I needed it most. She said she was just doing her job properly, which was exactly what every teacher should do. We rejoined the party, and I felt grateful for educators who understood their responsibility to students and took that role seriously. Nicholas found me near the food table and dragged me over to take photos with our group of friends. We posed in our graduation gowns, throwing our caps in the air and laughing at how ridiculous we looked in the formal attire. He joked that we should write a book about surviving biased teachers and call it How to Stand Up Without Getting Expelled. I laughed, but also felt grateful for friends who stood by me and learned their own lessons about speaking up. Nicholas admitted he almost stayed silent during the whole situation because he didn't want to get involved in drama between a student and teacher. But watching me advocate for myself inspired him to examine his own tendency to avoid conflict, even when he witnessed injustice. He said he learned that supporting friends through hard situations makes you stronger, and that speaking truth matters even when it's uncomfortable. Our friendship forged through adversity would last beyond high school, built on shared experience and mutual respect. We promised to stay in touch during college and keep encouraging each other to stand up for what's right. A letter arrived from the district superintendent 2 days after graduation. I opened the official envelope expecting some routine administrative communication and found a personal letter commending me for handling the situation with Mrs. Holloway through appropriate channels. The superintendent wrote that coming forward required courage, especially given my relationship with the principal and concerns about how it might look. My decision to report through proper procedures rather than seeking revenge or trying to handle it privately contributed to important policy changes that would protect future students from similar treatment. The letter acknowledged that the experience was difficult and unfair, but my response demonstrated maturity and integrity that reflected well on my character. Official recognition from district leadership validated that I did the right thing, despite how hard it was to face Mrs. Holloway's accusations and endure weeks of unfair treatment before speaking up. I showed the letter to Mom over dinner that evening, and she said the superintendent rarely sent personal letters to students. The fact that he took time to acknowledge my role in improving district policies meant my situation truly made a difference beyond just my individual case. Summer arrived, and I started working as a teaching assistant in a district enrichment program for middle school students. The program focused on helping younger students develop their writing skills through creative assignments and supportive feedback. I spent my mornings working with small groups of kids who struggled with organizing their thoughts or feared criticism of their work. The experience reinforced my love of education and learning while showing me the right way to mentor and encourage students. I consciously modeled the supportive teaching approach I wished Mrs. Holloway had taken, offering specific feedback that helped students improve without destroying their confidence. When a quiet girl showed me an essay she was nervous about, I praised the strong elements first before gently suggesting areas to develop. I watched her face light up with pride and relief, and I remembered how much I craved that kind of balanced feedback during my months in Mrs. Holloway's class. Working with these younger students helped me process my own experience by turning negative memories into positive action. I couldn't change what happened to me, but I could make sure I never made other students feel the way Mrs. Holloway made me feel. Mom and I met for lunch at our favorite cafe 3 weeks before I left for college. We sat at a corner table overlooking the street and talked about how the situation with Mrs. Holloway ultimately strengthened both our relationship and our individual growth. She admitted she learned important lessons about creating systems that catch problems early and supporting students who face unfair treatment. The new policies she implemented came directly from recognizing gaps that allowed my situation to escalate for so long. She said watching me suffer in silence taught her that students need clear, safe channels for reporting concerns, and that authority figures must actively look for signs of bias rather than waiting for complaints. I told her I learned when to ask for help, and that using available resources isn't weakness, but wisdom. I spent months trying to handle the situation alone, because I thought independence meant never asking for help. But real strength is recognizing when you need support, and having the courage to reach out before things become unbearable. We both grew through facing this challenge, and our relationship deepened through honest communication about difficult topics. Mom paid the check, and we walked back to the car, both of us feeling ready for the next chapter, even though it meant significant change. I spent the final week before college packing boxes and sorting through years of accumulated belongings. My room slowly transformed into a space stripped of personality as I decided what to bring to my dorm and what to leave behind. I folded clothes into suitcases with genuine excitement about the academic opportunities ahead and confidence in my ability to handle whatever challenges arose. The experience with Mrs. Holloway taught me that I could advocate for myself effectively, that proper channels existed for addressing injustice, and that my abilities were real regardless of one person's attempts to undermine them. I was heading to university stronger and wiser than I would have been without facing and overcoming that adversity. The difficult semester became a source of strength rather than shame, proof that I could survive unfair treatment and emerge with my integrity intact. I packed my framed AP score report carefully between layers of clothing, planning to hang it in my dorm room as a reminder of what I overcame and achieved. Mom helped me carry boxes to the car on the morning we left, both of us ready for this transition, even though it meant big changes for our daily relationship. Move-in day at college arrived with chaos and excitement filling every corner of campus. My parents helped me carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs to my assigned room, where my roommate was already unpacking her side. She introduced herself as we arranged furniture and claimed closet space, immediately friendly and easy to talk to. After my parents left and we finished the basic setup, I hung my framed AP score report on the wall above my desk. My roommate noticed it and asked why I displayed a test score instead of photos or posters. I shared the story about Mrs. Holloway and the semester of bias, framing it as a lesson about self-advocacy and standing up to unfair treatment through proper channels. She listened with growing amazement and said she was impressed by how I handled such a difficult situation. She admitted she probably would have either stayed silent or blown up at the teacher, neither of which would have led to real resolution. Hearing my story made her feel braver about facing her own challenges in this new environment, knowing that speaking up through appropriate channels could actually work. We talked late into the night about our hopes and fears for college, and I felt grateful that my difficult experience could inspire someone else to advocate for themselves when needed. The first English class at college met in a lecture hall with rows of seats that faced a podium and a huge whiteboard. I walked in early and picked a seat in the middle section where I could see and hear everything clearly. Other students filtered in and filled the space with nervous energy and quiet conversations about summer break. The professor arrived exactly on time and introduced herself as Dr. Chen, before diving straight into a discussion about the syllabus and course expectations. She asked us to share our thoughts on a short passage she projected on the screen, and I raised my hand without hesitation. Dr. Chen called on me and I gave my analysis of the symbolism and structure, explaining my interpretation with specific examples from the text. She nodded and said that was an excellent observation, then asked follow-up questions that pushed me to develop my ideas further. The feedback felt different from anything I experienced with Mrs. Holloway, because Dr. Chen was genuinely interested in my thinking process, rather than trying to prove me wrong. Other students contributed their perspectives, and Dr. Chen treated each comment with the same constructive engagement, building on good points and gently redirecting unclear arguments. I participated in 3 more discussions during that first class, and each time I felt more confident in my ability to analyze literature and express complex ideas clearly. The difference between fair evaluation and biased treatment was so obvious now that I wondered how I ever doubted my own abilities when Mrs. Holloway was tearing me down. My phone rang during my second week at college while I was sitting on my bed organizing notes from classes. Mom's name appeared on the screen and I answered immediately, eager to tell her how well everything was going. She asked about my classes and roommate and social life, and I told her I was genuinely thriving in ways I hadn't expected. The academic work was challenging, but fair. My roommate was becoming a real friend, and I felt comfortable being myself without worrying about hidden agendas or unfair treatment. Mom sounded relieved and happy to hear the positive update, then shared some news about the high school that made me sit up straighter. The new policies she implemented after my situation had already identified 2 other cases of teacher bias, before they got as bad as mine did. One involved a math teacher who consistently graded athletes more leniently than other students, and another involved a history teacher who gave lower participation grades to students who disagreed with his political views. Both situations got addressed quickly through the new anonymous reporting system and grade auditing process, with the teachers receiving coaching and closer supervision rather than termination. Mom said knowing that other students were being protected from suffering the way I did made all the difficult decisions worth it. I told her I felt the same way, and that turning my bad experience into something that helped others made the whole ordeal feel meaningful, instead of just painful. I sat at my desk in the dorm room 3 days later, finishing my first college essay for Dr. Chen's class. My roommate was at the library studying for a chemistry exam, and the room was quiet, except for the sound of my fingers on the keyboard. The essay analyzed themes of identity and belonging in the novel we discussed during the first week, and I felt genuinely excited about submitting it rather than anxious about unfair grading. Every sentence I wrote reflected my actual understanding and interpretation, without second-guessing whether a teacher would twist my words or claim I didn't understand the material. The confidence in my abilities that Mrs. Holloway tried so hard to destroy felt stronger than ever, rebuilt through proper support from Mom and the school administration, objective evaluation from teachers who graded fairly, and my own determination to not let one person's bias define my worth. I read through the essay one final time, made a few small edits to strengthen my argument, and clicked the submit button feeling proud of my work. The whole experience taught me that speaking up when something is wrong isn't weakness or complaining. It's necessary self-advocacy that protects not just yourself but potentially others facing similar situations. I was grateful for everyone who helped me get through that difficult semester and reach this point where I could focus on learning and growing without fear of unfair treatment. But mostly I was grateful for myself for having the courage to make that phone call and say the words that changed everything.